Hello, and welcome to another episode of Climbing on the Bookshelf. A short-ish intro this time for this one, as you've already heard the first episode, Volume 1. If you haven't, then rude. I strongly recommend you listen as I continue my conversation with John, this time about research for his 2 volumes of work, Mechanical Advantage, Tools for the Wild Vertical. For those of you that prefer the touch of a volume, and I'm talking to you, gym climbers, you know how much you enjoy holding those volumes. Did you know that there are other types of volumes? The ones I'm actually talking about here are book volumes. You can get just as good a kick out of touching, reading, and owning an actual book. These volumes are called Mechanical Advantage, Tools for the Wild Vertical, about climbing gear history, the evolution of climbing gear, and designs that have shaped climbing as you know it today. Then, John reminds us of another use for his portaledge design, rainforest activism. Awesome. If you head over to blurb.com, that's blurb.com, and then search for John Middendorf or Mechanical Advantage, you can find them both on there. Also, check out all of John's research on bigwallgear.com or have a look at bigwalls.net. I think both sites have a link to his research volumes as well. If you're not into that sort of thing, then go and check out the 2 websites anyway. It might just get you into it, and then you'll want to buy both volumes. John would really appreciate that. Go and check out his YouTube channel, which has his recent talk from his friend's climbing gym in Flagstaff, Arizona, and lots of other videos he's done. And don't forget to check out the latest episode of the Run Out podcast with Andrew Bisharat and Chris Kalous. Maybe on that one you can hear him properly. I've rambled on far too long now, even though I've said it would be a short intro. Just one more thing. I don't really like asking you lot for a favour. It would be really kind of you if you could rate and review my show on whichever platform you're using. Thank you. Oh, and don't forget about my merch. Once you get it, tag me on Instagram at ClimbBookshelf with a picture of you wearing or using it or with your other gear or whatever, and I'll mention you on the next episode. Thanks so much. So, here's Volume 2 of my chat with John Middendorf. Hope you enjoy, and thanks for listening. So, if it's okay, maybe we could move on to a bit of your research that you've been doing about past climbers. I noticed that you'd written an article in the American Alpine Journal about a particular guide by the name of Tito Piaz.
Yeah.
Perhaps you could expand on that a little and what you've been finding out about him. I've heard him very recently, not just in David Smart's book about Emilio Comici, he was mentioned quite a few times there, but also by a new podcast with Christian Beckwith. It's called 90 Pound Rucksack. It's about the American 10th Mountain Division and how they were involved in World War II and how they started to shape American outdoor recreation and things like that. And the last episode that I came across that I listened to, I think it was episode 2, he mentioned him a couple of times. It was just pure coincidence that we'd had a little chat about this particular guy, and he came up in another podcast last week or something that I listened to. So he must be quite an important person to find out about.
Well, I think so. I think there really hadn't been anything written in English about Tito Piaz, even though he wrote a book in Italian and it's been translated in German and French, I believe. And so in Europe, he's definitely got a local legend, but there had never really anything been written in English about Tito Piaz. But I guess I didn't start with Tito Piaz. As you can tell, I'm interested in gear and evolution. And after I finished doing all the portaledge development about 2020, it made me curious. Like, how does this gear develop? How does it evolve? And how do techniques and tools interlace throughout history? And so I started looking into that. And when I started climbing, it was basically like Otto Herzog invented the carabiner, Hans Fleischl invented the piton, Sulfur invented the rappel, and like those climbers had kind of brought modern climbing. And so, but when I look back after reading Tito Piaz, I mean, he was climbing in 1900 to 1910. Turns out, I mean, he developed all the modern techniques, really.
Okay.
I think of today, like he was actually at the forefront of. The nice thing about doing this research now, and I've actually been working a lot with Christian. You mentioned Christian because we've been sharing all sorts of sources and trading notes. But when I read Tito Piazza's book, I was like, wow, not only was he like one of the boldest free climbers of that early area, he also was doing hard, bold lead climbs and using pitons and sometimes bolts to set up climbs for his clients. And then he also pioneered things like the tension traverse and the Tyrolean, which he considered just a circus trick. But, of course, the Tyrolean is now, standard climbing technique. And he's really the first big wall climber, like the first technical big wall climber when he did the Totenkirkel up in the Wilder Kaiser.
That's in Austria, isn't it?
It's right isn't it on the border? Let's see, I have my map in my book.
I think so, yeah.
I have quite a few maps in my books. Back then, it was all the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and he was basically a Latin who lived down south in the area that's now part of Italy. But back then, it was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But he traveled up north to the Totenkirkel, and he was sort of a local legend already there. And he envisioned the line, and he was the first one to sort of say, "Okay, we can go up there, and then we can tension traverse to connect in with these other features." So that's really a new technique, and that's 1906 that he did that. So that was really quite a breakthrough.
Nobody before then had ever thought of doing that.
Well, I've researched it quite a bit, and there's really, it might have been done on a little crag, or probably had been done on a crag, but that was the first time like a major test piece was climbed.
Not on that scale, yes, I understand, yeah.
Yeah, so, in a sense, it was really one of the first technical big walls. Thomason ascent of Marmolada in 1901, probably one of the first true big walls. And her story is amazing too. She was kind of written out of history in the 1930s. She was an incredible, visionary really that saw these lines. So anyway, back to Tito Piaz, I just realized like, wow, not only was he pioneering all this stuff, but he was really quite a talented climber. So it made me wonder about all these other aspects of history. Like, well, what about when the first carabiner was used and developed piton technique, and how do all these tools and techniques line up with history? And when you look at climbing, I think what's unique about my books, Mechanical Advantage: Tools for the Wild Vertical, is when you look at climbing from a tool perspective, you get a whole different history out of it. It's not necessarily the hardest or the biggest number, but it's really about who's being the most clever, seeking out their vision for inspiring climbs, really.
Yes.
Because the tools really do play into how things can be climbed. And obviously, during the same era, a lot of the big mountains were getting, put up with iron ladders, basically, via ferratas.
Sure.
At the same time. And so climbing was sort of undergoing this shift, and like, well, what's a good style? What do we want to do with this? And so Tito Piaz was one who used the tools, lightweight tools. Like, he wasn't just going up there and just making ladders. He was strategically placing, a piece of protection here or there to make these climbs sane, basically. And then, also, I had read about Capomil Dasso for many years, and it was never quite clear whether the official report that you sometimes see in history books is that they used a couple pitons for descent. And when you look at the old literature now, and by the way, I think I was about to say this, the way this research was really facilitated was, I can speak a bit of German, but with Google Translate and these journals online, you really just start delving in deep into the past history.
Sure, yeah.
And I think that's sort of was a real limitation for the historians who have written great books in the past, but they weren't really able to really delve into the nuances of what was being published in the journals. So, but so that original route done in the 19th century in Capomil Basso, that was actually quite a few pitons on that descent. But so when you read about some histories which say first pitons were invented in 1910, well, that's that. There was in modern style, but I would call that modern style. They're climbing ground up, putting protection on the way and making it reasonable. So that really goes back quite a ways.
So how long has it taken you to research that, and is it still ongoing now?
Well, I have 2 volumes out. It takes us up to the 40s and maybe early 50s. that this whole thing was started just because I was talking to my friend Paul, and we were talking about working on the book together. Paul Pritchard interviewed.
Okay, yep.
We were thinking, like, what's the 10 biggest innovations in climbing? I think we were talking about portaledges and how they helped all these big climbs.
Yes.
And I'd written an article in 1999 for Ascent that was called Mechanical Advantage. And it was kind of a brief overview. And I thought, well, if we're going to work on this together, Paul, I need to research a little deeper. And so it just started out as a revision, 20-page article I'd already written to what is now over 500 pages of deep research into what I was doing is I was just researching it and then posting articles on bigwallgear.com. And then people are just asking me, well, put this into a book. And so I compiled all the articles I'd written on bigwallgear.com into 2 volumes. And they're available from Blurb.com. But, mostly it's a fresh perspective, I'd say, on climbing history, how tools and techniques have been developed. But there's a lot about the people, too, and the interesting aspects of the famous about in climbing. Miriam, perhaps, because you asked me about Miriam O'Brien. In my understanding of her before I started reaching her was she was a great free climber in the 20s, didn't like pitons because she wrote about pitons in the 50s. But when I started reading her book and reports about her and articles that she'd written, I realized, actually, she was really the first American climber and the best American climber doing bold piton-protected climbing back in the 20s. And the only reason I could figure this all out is because I'd just written all the research on folks like Tita Piaz, and so I was becoming much more familiar with how these old routes in Europe were being done. And Miriam O'Brien he climbed a lot in the East Coast and other places in North America, but mostly she was focused on climbing the hardest climbs in the Alps. She went to Chamonix and the Swiss Alps and the Dolomites. So I was familiar with the climbs that she'd been doing. I'm like, wow, well, those were all climbs that people were using pitons, innovating, like new techniques with bold climbing. And one of the challenges I think she was experiencing was, well, basically in the 20s and 30s, it was sort of a rise of fascism globally, and women were just having a hard time getting a foothold in the climbing world.
Yeah, sure. There's a bit of a funny story when she climbed the Grepon.
Yeah.
There was like a funny quote that some guy obviously wouldn't go down at all today. Something about it seems to have disappeared now that it's been done by 2 women alone.
Yeah.
Because it used to be a very good climb.
Yeah. Well, it's incredibly sexist back then.
Oh, absolutely.
For a few periods. And that's another interesting aside I think I have sort of uncovered a lot. My theory is, before World War I, climbing was very egalitarian. The top women climbers were climbing every bit as challenging climbs as the men. Very egalitarian and recognized so. Where there was a mutual respect. But in the 20s and 30s, I think it sort of reverted back to a little bit misogynistic kind of attitudes. And there were historians in the 30s, Rudalis, I talk about him a little bit in my book too. He actively spent pages dismissing Thomason's ascent of Marmolada in 1901. Really one of the most mind-blowing routes of that era. It should be in every history book. And there was National Geographic great climbs of the era, and they have all sorts of climbs from before and after that, but it's sort of been lost. And so I think, history is written by the victors, I guess. But anyway, back to Miriam. So, yeah, I just discovered, wow, she really was one of the world's best climbers. And not only her, but there was a whole group of really talented women in the East Coast of the U.S. And I think that in France, they really recognize the French women climbers. But Miriam's recognized. I mean, it's not like she was forgotten. She was always a bit of a sideline to her husband, Robert Underhill, who was an editor of the Appalachian Mountain Journal. But when you look at his experience versus her experience, I mean, she was just so much more talented climber. And, I just think underestimated would be term than forgotten, because when you look at her accomplishments, I mean, for sure, she was the Lynn Hill of the 1920s. People know that, I think, but not only because how well she was climbing, but also just how she was, her vision of what climbing could be. So I try to bring that out a little bit in my books. And
so your books that you've written, they're in 2 volumes, aren't they, I believe? One is for European and one is for North American, is that right?
mostly, yeah. I mean, I include, there is developments in Japan and other places that I include. But mostly, the volume 1 is really about like the emergence of tools like carabiners and pitons and how they were used and how these walls, it's really big wall focused in a way. But of course, that was what climbing was in that era too.
Okay.
And then volume 2 really is mostly about North America. But for example, Conrad Kane, who did most of his kind of fame, I guess, would be in North America as a guide up in the Canadian Rockies. I mean, I cover 20 or 30 pages of his incredible climbs that he did before he came to North America. And that also, so there is a lot of Europe also in volume 2, but it's really about how the awareness of climbing developed over the decades, established the standards.
We'll now take a quick break and get back to the show after this ad. Are you tired of drinking your morning coffee out of boring plain mugs? Look no further than Climbing on the Bookshelf podcast mugs. The mugs are designed with the avid climber in mind. With the show's unique design, you can show off your love for climbing literature and the podcast at the same time. Whether you're sitting down and listening to Climbing on the Bookshelf, a pro climber, or just starting out, the mugs are a perfect addition to your collection of climbing gear. But wait, are you looking for more ways to show your love of climbing for your favourite climbing literature podcast? Look no further than our exclusive Climbing on the Bookshelf unisex t-shirt. Not only does the unisex t-shirt look great with the show's logo, they're also incredibly comfortable to wear. The unisex t-shirt is perfect for any climbing activity, whether you're hiking to the crag or just lounging around waiting for your turn at the climbing gym to send your next proj. With different colours and sizes available, you'll look great even when you're sitting down and reading a mountain literature book, of course. How about a Climbing on the Bookshelf tote bag? This is the perfect accessory for carrying some of your climbing gear. You can even use it for non-climbing related shopping outings too. But why would you do that? You could put your groceries in it, put a picnic in it, maybe even that new mountain literature book or guide that you've been hankering after in your local bookshop. So, if you're a fan of climbing literature and love listening to Climbing on the Bookshelf, don't wait any longer to get your hands on our exclusive Climbing on the Bookshelf mugs, unisex t-shirt and tote bag. Did you get the message that the t-shirt is unisex? Or did I overdo it a bit? Order now and show the world your love for climbing and your favourite climbing literature podcast. See the link in the show notes or head over to Instagram at ClimbBookshelf where there's a link in the bio. Happy climbing, and now back to the show. So, remind me again where you can get these books from.
Well, as I said, I've compiled you can go to bigwallgear.com and read all the articles as I wrote them. I did do a lot of editing. I've compiled PDFs, and they're available to download for free at bigwalls.net. And then a lot of people do want print versions, but they're on blurb.com. And if you Google search John Middendorf Blurb, or you could Google search Blurb Mechanical Advantage, and the 2 books, Volume 1 and Volume 2, will come up.
Fantastic.
That's a print-on-demand service.
Sure, okay, so you're not printing off like 100 and then selling them and...
Yeah, they just print order. It's a useful tool for researchers. And the PDF is easily searchable. And, I just found when I was doing my research, it was so much easier when I had a digital copy. I could search for Mauerhaken and find out where the pitons were being used when. And so I've made this tool available. I think researchers might find it useful because I really have gone deep in a lot of areas.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
When you emailed me with the list of things that you were going to talk about, you also said there's a little point here that I've got written down about how each generation of climbers create their own take, but manage to build in people from the past to their own styles, so they're not forgotten.
Yeah, I think after reflecting after 2 years of researching this material, what I noticed is like each era, basically, for example, the grade 6 was the big grade before World War II, and each era sort of has its own heroes from the past, but yet they're developing a whole new style. Where pitons were being used just for assurance to make sure if you fell, like basically as we use clean climbing gear today, safely protect you if you fall or for a belay, to these hard A climbs in the Dolomite. Each era kind of designs their own paradigms for what is valid. Doesn't forget the past, but kind of just remembers a few key moments, and which is very limited in my opinion. Like the big picture is it's a progression. You see that from the turn of the century to the 30s, where these big A climbs, where they're just like, and then in the 50s, where people are starting to even go more into aid, and then back into the 70s when clean climbing and free climbing, really becomes strong again. And then, of course, in the late 80s, my era where ground up was pretty much like that was the way you climbed. That was the standard to climb, to today's sort of top-down, pre-protect things and work on incredible difficulty. So there's always some ultimate challenge. There's always some ultimate level of climbing in each era. But, the style and the tools are obviously very. The level of climbing is dependent on the style and the level of tools. And what's accepted is actually interesting. Like what becomes like acceptable. I mean, of course, if somebody started to grid bolt, back in the 70s, that wouldn't have been acceptable. But now that kind of climbing is, because you're looking for that kind of gymnastic difficulty. But it's almost circular. You see these things come and go, and try to envision what's next. So at some point, the kind of standard climbing, the sport climbing of today, was superseded by some other type of climbing, but it's really hard to imagine. I don't think it's impossible to, like, what will happen next. But yeah, it's interesting to see that kind of common thread, because, I mean, for me, when I was witnessing the sort of demise of like ground up climbing as the highest form of climbing in the 80s, at first I was very disdainful of sport climbing, but now I see how it's become its own end, and it brought a lot more people into climbing and made it safer. So I just think that that wasn't the only time climbing's changed. It's gone through that kind of transition.
What are your thoughts and take on speed climbing? When I watched it at the Olympics, I thought it would kind of change the way more people would view climbing. They'd think it was a bit of fun and might get people into climbing, maybe.
Yeah, I guess so. I just feel like, when you saw Adam Andre up there climbing technically so well, that not necessarily the best. He's a second behind the fast climbers, and then it cost him a medal. I think that's a little bit, but that's about the scoring system, I guess. That's more. But I guess speed climbing. It seems like it'd be more interesting to me if the route was different every time, like it is in the real world. Because we used to love doing that, just going to a crag and setting up a top rope and Josh or something, timing ourselves to see how fast we could climb things.
Yeah, sure.
It's definitely, but I think it's also a vestige of the Russian system, where that was a parameter of whether you would get sponsored to go on expeditions or not. It's how well you could do these sort of standardized climbing tasks.
Because I think it's going to be its own thing in the Olympics next time, I believe.
Oh, that's obviously better, yeah.
Because that three-way climbing, the sport and the bouldering and that all combined was it was only a test, wasn't it, I guess, for that first Olympics, but I think they're going to do speed climbing separate to the other two.
Yeah, I was really sad to see Adam Andre not get a medal, because he was a contender. He was like in second place, and then because of some he dropped sixth or whatever. But just his attitude about the sport and how it just looked like he was having so much fun there. I was really rooting for him, but that's the way it goes, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. But that's another, that's just another nuance of climbing that when you look at it from one perspective, I mean, because we have the technology just to put steel ladders up every climb, it's always just going to be an interesting way of creating limitations, and how much technical ability do we want to focus on. So climbing is what it is at any one era, but it's always evolving and changing. And
yeah, I guess the people from the past could probably, if they saw it now, they probably wouldn't think that it was, how has it come on so much?
Yeah,
Again, at the same time, again in the future,
yeah,
we're going to think the same as well.
Yeah, but at the same time, you don't want to be that grumpy old guy.
No,
that's
not the way we did it.
I mean, all the crowds is probably the biggest downfall. When you go to some of the climbing areas that used to be empty, there's a lot of people there. That's
yes,
it's mortifying. But you take a little bit of adventure,
which may be why people do the big wall in remote places to get away from all that.
Yeah,
and they take your portalage with them.
Yeah,
they always do. Yeah, right. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else. I think I've gone through everything that I've got written down. I think I wanted to cover. Have you got anything else that? I know you've got a slideshow coming up soon, haven't you?
Yeah. Great warm up for being in front of.
And on your website, you've got quite a few slideshows written down.
Yeah.
From all over the world. Are you going to be showing all of those, or is it just the one particular thing you're going to be concentrating on?
Oh no, I completely just collected a bunch of random photos for this one. It's like how I got started, but I'm trying to link in like why I wrote these books, because the show is ostensibly about showing the books, but really, I guess when I realized that, when I look back, it's like I've always just been really interested in the engineering, mechanical aspect of climbing.
Yeah.
I mean, I love soloing. I probably soloed more yardage than any other type of climbing in my time, but it's even that is like using the minimal amount of gear, chalk bag and shoes, to be efficient with moving on rock. So I'm trying to link in like how all these things I've tinkered with in my climbing career, and I'll also use them to accomplish new climbs, and how that links in with basically why I'd be interested in the history of tools and how they because that will inform where it's going to go too.
Yeah, sure. Fantastic. I'm very conscious that we've been chatting for well over an hour now. I don't really want to take up any of your time. I mean,
that's good. I really appreciate it. It's been really fun.
Yeah, it's been great. It's been absolutely incredible. I in a way, I can't believe I'm talking to John Middendorf. It's unbelievable. I know we've been following each other for a little while. I don't know either on Instagram or Twitter. Actually, Twitter I don't actually use very often anymore. I think it's dying a death a bit now.
But I'll probably delete that too. Anytime I'm on social media, if I get more than a few hundred people,
it's about what I get as well at the moment.
But yeah, I just keep deleting my social media here and there. But balls.net is around, and I usually post any news or things.
Where can people get hold of you if they want to follow you?
Well, Instagram, John Middendorf 4, but as I say, that could be temporary. But bigwalls.net probably maintain. I guess one thing I would like to say is I was making those 100 portages for climbers from 2017 to 2020, but right now I don't really make any. I still make a few like high tech ones, but I've been making sort of a disposable portalage that's still strong, a little bit heavier for the Tarkine activists. So I live where the forests are just incredibly beautiful, so unique, these temperate rainforests, but yet there's just no awareness of what treasure they actually have, and they're basically getting shredded year after year. And in the next 30 years, they're going to just destroy all this incredible ecosystem rainforest. So I've been building portalages, working with them, and teaching activists how to build their own portalages so they can go up and sit in a tree and protect it from bulldozers.
Yeah, fantastic.
And that's been really rewarding and fascinating. And I've also almost gotten arrested a few times. Mostly, I try to support the activists who really are and really important, I think. And of course, it's the same everywhere where they're being called crazy greenies and everything. But when you see if you actually go to these temperate rainforests in Tasmania, nobody could say, "Oh, this should just be turned into," this. It's thousands of years of making those forests, and in our lifetimes, our children's lifetimes, maybe great grandchildren's lifetimes. So anyway, it's a plug for the Tarkine rainforest.
No, that's fine. It's fantastic. Thank you for that. It's something I wouldn't have known that your portaledge design could be used for. I'd never even have thought of that side of it.
Here's the thing, because I got to know the activists because I went up there and just saw how beautiful it was and met them protesting.
Yeah.
And they were using these big giant plywood platforms to set up. And what they had to do sometimes was, because these coops are behind locked gates, sometimes they had cut the locked gate to drive in, to get these big giant tree sits. And then you read in the newspaper, vandals, destroyed property, so I was like, well, you don't need to cut the gate. We can just go in and I've been making portalages for 20 years. They only 5 kilos. Let's just use those. And so I got to know some of the activists and started supplying them, usually with my prototypes, and they were using them. And now, that's a sort of a Tasmanian protest tool.
Okay, yeah, like the go-to thing they use. Yeah.
They get the reason why we make them semi-disposable is because they get confiscated by the police, and then
sure.
Figure out how to use local tubing and make them for about $120 each, and
okay.
And people can. And this one woman, Taito, who just spent 71 days in one she made herself.
Wow, it's incredible.
So yeah, that's really been rewarding, helping them figure out how to make safe, engineered, or affordable, heavier, like more heavy than you'd want on a big wall. But
yeah, sure, fantastic.
Well, thank you, Stuart. I really appreciate the time.
Thanks very much. I really appreciate speaking to you, and I was absolutely over the moon when you said, "Yeah, sure, I'm really looking forward to it." I was like, "Wow, John Middendorf, that's fantastic. Thank you."
Oh, this is great. I really appreciate it. So
yeah, I've really enjoyed our chat. I've learned a lot. Thank you.
Great. Well, hopefully I'll see you in the southeast UK someday.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. If ever you're over here, then I'll try and meet up or something. Yeah, that'd be fantastic.
Okay. Tasmania, you're always welcome to.
Yeah. A little bit too far of a commute, but yeah.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you very much for your time. Hope everything goes well with the slideshow and
the Grand Canyon. I'll be rowing a boat for 19 days down in the Colorado River. I used to work as a guide, but it's been 20 years, so that's been that's
amazing.
Next week we start. Yeah. So
what fun that'll be! That'll be incredible.
With my whole family, 2 kids and my wife. And
I hope it's nice weather for you.
Yeah, it'll be hot.
Just take a quick swim. That's all you need to do.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks, Stuart.
All right. Thanks a lot.